Welcome to War Bios, the podcast where we delve into the most pivotal battles in history, and I'm your host, General Biography. Today, we're going to explore one of the most decisive conflicts of the 19th century, the Battle of Koniggratz, fought on July 3, 1866. This clash between the Austrian Empire and the Kingdom of Prussia would not only reshape the European landscape, but also usher in a new era of warfare, marking a significant turning point in military history. The German Confederation, a loose alliance of states, was struggling to maintain unity, with both Austria and Prussia vying for dominance. The spark that would ignite the conflict was the dispute over the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein, which had been under Danish rule but were claimed by both Austria and Prussia. In 1864, Austria and Prussia formed an alliance to wage war against Denmark, successfully capturing the duchies. However, this victory would prove short-lived, as the two powers soon found themselves at odds over how to administer the newly acquired territories. The situation escalated in 1866 when Prussia, under the leadership of Otto von Bismarck, began to mobilize its military, seeking to settle the issue once and for all. Austria, confident in its own military prowess, refused to back down, and on June 14, 1866, Prussia declared war. The Austrian army, led by General Ludwig von Benedek, was a formidable force with a long history of military tradition and excellence. However, the Prussian army, under the command of King William I and his chief of staff, Helmuth von Moltke, had undergone significant modernization and reforms, adopting new tactics and technologies that would give them a decisive edge on the battlefield. The Prussians had adopted the Dreyse needle gun, a breech-loading rifle that allowed soldiers to fire from a prone position, providing them with greater accuracy and protection. Additionally, the Prussian army had developed a more efficient system of mobilization and logistics, enabling them to rapidly deploy and supply their troops. In contrast, the Austrian army was still reliant on traditional tactics, emphasizing cavalry charges and linear formations. Despite these differences, the Austrians remained confident in their abilities, drawing on their rich military heritage and the experience of their seasoned officers. In the weeks leading up to the Battle of Koniggratz, both sides engaged in a series of skirmishes and maneuvers, each seeking to gain the upper hand. The Prussians, with their superior mobilization and logistics, were able to rapidly concentrate their forces, while the Austrians struggled to respond effectively. On June 27, 1866, the Prussian army launched a surprise attack on the Austrian-held town of Nachod, capturing key positions and forcing the Austrians to retreat. This initial victory set the tone for the upcoming battle, as the Prussians continued to push forward, seeking to exploit their momentum. The Austrians, however, were far from defeated, and they regrouped and prepared to face the Prussian army in a decisive showdown. As the two forces clashed on the outskirts of Koniggratz, the fate of Europe hung in the balance, and the outcome of the battle would depend on the strategic vision, tactical innovation, and sheer determination of the soldiers and commanders on both sides. As the Prussian army pushed forward, they encountered the Austrian forces on the outskirts of Koniggratz, near the village of Sadowa, on July 3, 1866. The Austrians had taken up defensive positions on the high ground, with their artillery deployed to cover the approaches. However, the Prussians were not deterred, and they launched a series of attacks against the Austrian lines. The fighting began at around 7:00 am, as the Prussian infantry advanced across the open fields, supported by their artillery. The Austrians held firm, but the Prussians' superior firepower and tactics soon began to tell. The Dreyse needle gun proved its worth, allowing the Prussian soldiers to fire from a prone position and pick off the Austrian artillerymen. As the morning wore on, the Prussians made steady gains, pushing the Austrians back towards the village of Sadowa. The Austrian cavalry, which had been held in reserve, was committed to the battle, but it was unable to stem the Prussian tide. The Prussian infantry, supported by their artillery, broke through the Austrian lines, and the defenders were forced to retreat. One notable example of the Prussians' tactical innovation was the use of their artillery to support the infantry advance. The Prussian gunners would lay down a barrage on the Austrian positions, and then the infantry would advance, using the cover of the artillery fire to get close to the enemy lines. This tactic allowed the Prussians to break through the Austrian defenses and exploit the gaps in their lines. As the Austrians retreated, they left behind many of their wounded and dead. The Prussians, however, were able to tend to their own wounded and continue the pursuit of the Austrians. The Battle of Koniggratz was a decisive victory for the Prussians, and it marked a turning point in the war. The Austrian commander, General Ludwig von Benedek, later said, "I did not think that the enemy would attack me with such force and determination." He also acknowledged that the Prussians' superior artillery and tactics had been the key to their victory. The Prussian commander, King William I, was pleased with the outcome of the battle, and he praised his soldiers for their bravery and discipline. As the day drew to a close, the Prussians had secured a major victory, and the Austrians were in full retreat. The Battle of Koniggratz would go down in history as one of the most significant battles of the 19th century, and it would have far-reaching consequences for Europe. The Prussians' use of modern tactics and technology had given them a decisive edge on the battlefield, and they would continue to push forward, seeking to exploit their advantage. The aftermath of the battle saw the Prussians pursuing the Austrians, who were in disarray. The Austrian army was forced to retreat back into Bohemia, leaving behind many of its supplies and equipment. The Prussians, on the other hand, were able to continue their advance, pushing deep into Austrian territory. On July 5, 1866, the Prussian army crossed the Elbe River, marking a significant milestone in their campaign. They were now deep in Austrian territory, and they were poised to strike at the heart of the empire. The Austrians, meanwhile, were struggling to regroup and respond to the Prussian advance. As the Prussians continued to push forward, they encountered increasing resistance from the Austrian army. However, they were able to overcome these obstacles, using their superior tactics and technology to break through the Austrian lines. The Battle of Koniggratz had been a decisive victory for the Prussians, and it had set them on the path to ultimate triumph. The events of July 3, 1866 would be remembered for generations to come as a turning point in European history. The Battle of Koniggratz had marked the beginning of a new era in warfare, one in which modern tactics and technology would play a decisive role. The Prussians' victory had also set them on the path to becoming a major power in Europe, and it would have far-reaching consequences for the continent. As the Prussian army continued its advance into Austrian territory, the Austrians were forced to sue for peace. The Treaty of Prague, signed on August 23, 1866, officially ended the Austro-Prussian War and marked a significant shift in the balance of power in Europe. The treaty led to the dissolution of the German Confederation and the creation of the North German Confederation, with Prussia as its dominant member. The Battle of Koniggratz had far-reaching consequences for Austria, which lost significant territory and influence in Germany. The war also marked the emergence of Prussia as a major military power, with its army becoming a model for other European nations. As the renowned military historian Hans Delbrück noted, the Battle of Koniggratz was the first great victory of the modern German army, and it marked the beginning of a new era in warfare. In the years following the battle, the Prussian army continued to innovate and modernize, adopting new technologies and tactics that would shape the course of future conflicts. The battle also had significant implications for the development of military theory and strategy, with many historians regarding it as a prime example of the effective use of combined arms and maneuver warfare. Today, the Battle of Koniggratz is remembered as a pivotal moment in European history, marking the beginning of German unification under Prussian leadership. The battle is commemorated at the Koniggratz Museum in the Czech Republic, which features exhibits on the history of the battle and its significance. Visitors can also see the battlefield itself, which has been preserved as a memorial to the soldiers who fought and died there. The battle marked a turning point in the development of modern warfare, highlighting the importance of combined arms, maneuver, and strategic planning. It also had significant implications for European politics, contributing to the unification of Germany and the emergence of Prussia as a major power. In conclusion, the Battle of Koniggratz was a decisive victory for the Prussian army, marking the beginning of a new era in warfare and shaping the course of European history. That's all for today's War Bios. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, I'm General Biography reminding you to keep marching toward victory.